Theatre of British politics. Rishi Sunak is the new Prime Minister, announced this afternoon after Liz Truss resigned last Thursday and after former Prime Minister Boris Johnson pulled out of the leadership race last night. The latest events truly represent a spectacle in British political theatre, with seemingly only a small proportion of the crowd, namely us, the British populace, finding themselves in applause. Widespread calls already trending on social media for a general election, mixed reactions amongst the Conservative Party itself. Join me tonight as I digest the reaction from across the web, whilst offering my own reflections on the latest developments within British politics. Well, theatre indeed. We really are putting on a show for the rest of the world as it stands. It seems quite ludicrously facing our third Prime Minister in feels like weeks now. Somebody shared a graphic online saying that we've had four, maybe coming up to the fifth Chancellor in as many months. It really is becoming laughable what's happening in British politics. Meanwhile, the country's in chaos. The economy is up and down like a yo-yo. The market is driving chaos in itself. You know, we have to think about what the market is and the hedge funds involved in driving the political response. Who really calls the shots? How long will Sunak last? All these questions are being asked. How will the market respond? What will the people ask? What will they demand? Can Sunak unite the country? He gave his first rather stale speech earlier on today, very short, very sharp, stating that there is no doubt that we face a profound economic challenge and that we now need stability and unity. I certainly agree with those 2 points. And he goes on to say he'll make it his utmost priority to bring the Conservatives and the country together, because that's the only way we'll overcome the challenges that we face and build a better, more prosperous future for our own children, our grandchildren. These are the words of Rishi Sunak early on today. Thank goodness he didn't use the phrase build back better. He did go down the road of building a better, more prosperous future, which I think all of us require right now. We do or wish, I hope, for a more prosperous future than the one we're currently facing right now with the economic challenges we're witnessing. He goes on to say that he will pledge to serve us with integrity and humility, and will work day in, day out to deliver for the British people. Integrity is a key word. Humility is another interesting one. Kind of Truss came in with all this bluster and kind of almost faux force that she was going to come in and take this really ruthless approach to growing the economy. And I think, as I shared in my kind of assessment of the political hustings, where I had the opportunity to kind of look behind the scenes at the Conservative Party within the leadership contest, I reflected back then that Truss really didn't seem congruent. It seemed like words and deeds were not going to match. And I think her outcome is a reflection partly of that and the lack of humility that comes with that. Integrity is a key piece that I'm sure has been shot to pieces across the political realm. I find myself looking for integrity within politics and often find myself wanting, where do you look for integrity within politics? Those that are calling for a general election clearly think that the grass could be greener on the other side. But the reality is you're facing between Rishi Sunak, which I'll go on to talk more about in a moment, and Keir Starmer at Labour and Sarah Davey at the Lib Dems. Let's be real. A lot of the people who followed the pandemic podcast that preceded the Elevate podcast over the last couple of years would be deeply concerned about a Labour government who campaigned for stronger, harder, more intense restrictions. And let's be real, Labour is trying to position itself as the kind of party for the people, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But Keir Starmer himself, with all the fuss that's going on about Sunak and his wealth and all this sort of thing, and his connections to the WEF, and I'll comment on that throughout this episode. Keir Starmer is associated with the Trilateral Commission, another organisation funded and founded by the Rockefellers. It's another wealthy elite club that has undue influence on the world. So it's hardly Mr. Working Class with his working class hero, standing up for the people with his own 7 million net worth. Granted, Sunak's family worth is 100 times that, but we're not exactly talking about, Mr. off the streets doing it for the people within Labour. So I do find the whole thing ironic and laughable and part of the old political game that we're facing. And then Ed Davey, successful business leader, but seemingly, I just find the Lib Dems are just a very wet party. What do they actually stand for? In principle, the clue is in the title: liberal democracy, Lib Dems. We'd all have a liberal democracy, I'm sure, particularly one that focuses on freedoms and rights and prosperity and a democratic government, but we just don't see a strong party there. So all of those people kind of rallying today with the getting behind the hashtag general election now, it's just really, have you really thought about what choices you'll be facing if we actually faced a general election right now? Surely the chaos now of just going right this winter, this winter of discontent where the economy is shot. People are worried about how they're going to pay the bills, rising inflation, double-digit inflation, interest rates going up, mortgage costs going up, all of these things. Do you think we really need months of political posturing where these three parties and other fringe parties play out to try and win the battle of the general election? Do you think that's really helpful right now? I'm sure some people would be yelling at me saying, yes, it is, Dan, because now we've got Sunak in, what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. I get it. I get the frustration of all the British people right now. But let's just take a step back and just see how frustrating the overall political machine is first, before we get into the detail of the individuals, the parties, and the prospects. Let's be real. The political machine in the United Kingdom is clearly broken, and it's clearly not going to be repaired by any of the incumbent parties. They can all talk the talk, but it's not going to change anything because the system itself is broken. And we saw in the last few weeks how, we don't have a democracy in the United Kingdom. The illusion of democracy is very clear now to see. If you can't open your eyes and witness that your vote really counts for nothing, your vote might help to get, someone across the line and in power. It may contribute a small part if the elections are fair and just, which they're probably not. But the reality is, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, the money men, and it is the money men. Sorry for those of you who prefer, we had a more equal world. We don't. That's the reality. We've just got these, largely white middle-class men, not middle class, white elite men who control the world through their money. We can see that right now. And that is, I'm not advocating for that in any way. It's unjust, it's wrong, but they control the political sentiment, and it's quite clear that Truss did not meet the requirements of the political elite and therefore was booted out. Whether Sunak is responded to differently, who time will tell. My gut reaction is it won't. My gut reaction is the market will also be pushing for a general election because the market is reflective of the overall progressive politics that is currently rising in prominence across the world. The same political prominence that has brought this kind of woke culture, this ESG, World Economic sponsored kind of new way of stakeholder governance. All of this has been driven in the shadows by the same forces. And they're all dressed up as these lovely things that are good for the planet, but they're all authoritarianism in disguise. They're all neo-fascism in disguise, where corporations run the world, or neo-feudalism. People get a little tense when they hear the word fascism. Neo-feudalism is a much more polite word for saying the corporates run the world, which they do. So, yes, we have the illusion of democracy. We can bang our fists and say, let's have a general election, the system's broken. But to be honest, it's just more noise. If we really want change, we have to really think about how do we build the thing up from the ground up for the new world that we live in, for the modern digital world that we live in. The reality is we do live in a technologically advanced world compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So we need to build a political system that is fit for the new world, the modern world. None of the current governments are going to do that. No, they're going to maintain the status quo and maintain the establishment, the established order. Doesn't matter who's in, they'll all be doing that, as I've already previously referenced. Now, back onto the point of the political theatre, talking about Sunak coming into power today. Well, I've shared a little bit about what he's shared in his very brief speech. I'm sure there'll be more to come addressing the nation. But he also told MPs today, prior to his public announcement, his ambition is to have a highly productive UK economy, stressing a commitment to levelling up, closing in on that Build Back Better. It's all political posturing. They all use the same language. And the pledges of the 2019 manifesto, he said that the party backed low taxation, but had to be affordable and deliverable. He did offer some warnings to Truss about what would happen if she followed through the plan that she put forth, which led to such backlash. But again, we'll talk more about that because it really is not to me, it's not really reflective of the real problems here. But he said that a stable and productive economy would be the engine that drove a well-funded health and education service, as well as delivering on net zero carbon emissions, instead of being an extremely environmentally focused government. So really trying to tick all the trendy boxes right now there, with political platitudes, a lot of political platitudes there, but stating that there'll be no early election. Time will tell. The pressure is going to be ramping up. This all over social media. The market may decide that they've had enough of a right-wing government and therefore would like to push for something that moves further left. The market may make that decision, and therefore Sunak will be under a lot of pressure, and the key will be can he stand his ground. And I always point out to people as I do these broadcasts that I have no political allegiance over the years. I find myself someone who is deeply politically homeless. I've voted for the Blues, the Reds, the Greens, and the Yellows over my political lifetime, and I have no allegiance. I try to vote for the individual and the party who I feel will best serve the nation at that given time, which is always a difficult choice because I'm always left feeling like none of them are a good option. And every day at the last few months, I've got back to that point thinking I've always thought I can make a bigger difference to the world through entrepreneurial activities from outside the system. But every day of the last weeks, I've been thinking, is it time just to suck it up and go into politics and try and do something different? But, at this stage, I can only see some of the problems and not even all the problems and the depths of the problems, let alone being able to think about what would be a more reasonable solution for the modern world. But I do think we should be starting that conversation between us. I think we should be looking at this. What is a better alternative? Is there something out there that we could start to pursue? Because ultimately, the political theatre, with us in the audience, the spectators laughing at the spectacle, meanwhile suffering the consequences, has to change. We can no longer be the passive observers of the chaos of our world. We have to be the active participants of change and creation. We have to think about how we can actually, despite our busy lives, contribute at least some of our time to thinking about what can we do differently and get out of this apathetic zone that we find ourselves in. And I'm speaking the royal we here. Don't worry, I'm not criticizing you individually. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm just saying more broadly, if we want things to change, then we have to somehow be the catalyst for that change. So there is very little positive response today to any of the announcements of Sunak taking charge. Obviously, his backers are very positive. I'm sure certain contingents within the Conservative ranks are very happy. But there's a deeper dissatisfaction within the British populace, which is playing out here. And it's not just political dissatisfaction. In this, as the economy starts to show cracks, what tends to happen is, history plays this out. I remember it during the 2008, 2009 recession as well, and how when standards of living are reasonable or in growth for most people, there's generally a lack of internal conflict within the nation. And Ray Dalio's video, his video on market cycles, global cycles, also speaks into this, but as another source on this. But when the economy starts to show cracks, that's when you start to see the internal fissures. You start to see the wealth divide becoming more visceral. And actually what that does is people become more vocal about those problems and looking for solutions, looking to the government to redistribute wealth, to actually create a more equal environment. And people turn to the government to try and create that. And I've always looked at that with kind of a admiration to some degree, that people wish that the government would be the ones that would solve the kind of injustices and inequalities within society. And, maybe there is a place for that. But I also, another part of me looks at that as kind of looking to like mum and dad. We had this like paternalistic relationship with the government, which has really played out in the last couple of years. And it's almost like, you look at the rich and the poor as like one sibling has got more than the other, and you want the parents to come and sort it out so that it's fair again between the people. I kind of, see how hard parents do that. My own upbringing, even at Christmas, like my parents would always try and make sure my sister and I had like the same amount of presents. It's like that relationship to make sure everyone has a fair upbringing within their family. And I'm sure everyone's got different family upbringings, may not be reflective of that, but it's almost like this paternalistic relationship that we have with the state, looking for the state to fix these problems. And as I said, it's a noble cause. Perhaps they should have greater intervention in the wealth divide, and certainly looking at how these major corporations have undue influence. It's quite clear governments are bought. It's quite clear that they're infiltrated by these globalist institutions, the World Economic Forum. People still treat it like a conspiracy theory. It's insane. How can you call it a conspiracy theory? It's quite evident. It's quite evident that the level of influence that major elite individuals and organizations have over governments, not just the British government, but all Western governments, and likely further afield. But certainly I can evidence it firsthand, looking at the influences of these types of organizations in the Western economies. So it's quite clear that we have a problem. But I also think we have to be thinking about how we take our own futures into our own hands. And that's individually as well as collectively as a society. I remember when I made a choice in my political history when I voted aspirationally. I voted for the party that I wanted to represent my future self. At the time, I'd gone through a lot of stress, struggle, and sacrifice. I'd gone broke starting my business. And I was dreaming for a better life of myself, but I wasn't looking to the government. Yes, I did actually turn to the government for support when I was right on my knees. I also turned to my own family. And that's what we tend to do. And when we're broken and when we're facing our darkest days, we have to look to others for help, and we have to find the courage to ask for help. That can be hard, and that's without deviating into my own personal story. It's important that we do have support mechanisms out there for those who struggle. And I've been through my own fair share of struggles in many different ways. But I remember also, as I've shared on the podcast before, when I once went to my family for support when I ran out of money. Like, they said no. They previously supported me, and they will always support me. They'll never let me go hungry or homeless. But it was that decision to say, no, you've got to stand on your own 2 feet, that gave me the impetus to finally stand up and say, you know what, I'm taking full responsibility for my own future. And, it became a turning point in my life. And I continued going through stress and struggle and sacrifice, but my goodness, I turned things around. And sometimes I feel when I look at society, it's like we need a little bit more of that personal responsibility. Like, we've seen personal responsibility almost like demonized, that it's someone else's responsibility. What happened to, taking responsibility for our own lives and the lives around us? That's, again, it's not stating that we don't need other mechanisms when we're down on our knees, or when we need, when we've got other challenges. It's not saying that we shouldn't have that, but I'm saying if we want to get into this growth economy, then it's not just on the politicians, it's on us. Surely it's on us to actually go out there and take action to make our own lives better, society better, and contribute to the world around us. Yes, we can campaign for greater support for those who need it, but right now, for those of us, we've got to have more aspiration, I think. We've got to be thinking aspirationally. If we want things to change, we have to be the change. Anyway, side note, side rant. So Sunak has said there'll be no early election, as I said, although opposition parties are already clamoring for one. Labour have gone full into, and again, I just want to be very clear. Like, I have no allegiance. I'm quite happy to pour scorn on the Conservatives as much as I am on Labour, the Libs, Greens, whoever else. It's about taking a political view on this and seeing what the challenge is. And already the opposition are pushing for an early election to change things around. But we have to, I just think we just got to be adults and be like, right, screw it. I don't care what we think about Sunak, the Conservatives, how broken the party is. Let's give the guy a chance, maybe. Maybe we do need to actually just sit back and go, let's support someone for a change. I'm not saying that we should support Sunak or that either one of you should find favour in him. But at some point, we've got to be right. Let's just get this house in order. Let's just get Britain moving again. Let's get things going. Let's actually give it a shot, because if we keep starting, we're going to be one of the laughing stock of Europe if we're not already. So, I think there has to be some level of patience and put our own egos aside and put our own views aside and say, right, we need a bit of time and space to actually resolve some of the problems Britain's facing and actually play our part in doing that. But obviously, there's many challenges out there. The public, don't trust Sunak, a lot of them. Certainly the opposition don't, but also some of the main people within the Conservative Party don't. My recent podcast guest, I've seen that Christopher Chope, he's the MP for Christchurch, who's a Johnson supporter, warned already today that Sunak has previously been seen as undermining both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and this could lose loyalty within the Conservatives. So there's already, divided ranks within the Conservative Party. They're saying that he doesn't have the mandate, but the election would give him the mandate. But I still come back to that point that it would be absolute chaos for the country for the next few months. Is that short-term pain, long-term gain? You tell me. What do you think in the comments? Tell me what your thoughts are. Should we be going through a general election right now? Should we go through that process? Would that give a fair and final mandate to a prime minister? Is it a waste of time? Long-term, I think it's a waste of time. But tell me right now, what do you think in the comments? Let me know what you think. Should we be having a general election? Now, we're certainly looking at the global press, looking at the headlines in France last week. They said that the Prime Minister's departure plunges Britain into profound and unprecedented political crisis, noting that this week we'll learn the name of the third Conservative Prime Minister in 3 months, and they're absolutely right. So the people from outside are looking at us as a bit of a laughing stock. So we have to do something to turn things around. We certainly do have to go for stability. Now, on Sunak himself, let's talk a little bit about the character. So a lot is being made in lieu of what I've just shared around how he's the richest MP in Parliament, and therefore, will be a boon for the financial lobby. Tax justice campaigners are warning this is going to be a problem. People are saying that, or critics are saying that Sunak's not exactly been transparent with his own financial interests, that his hedge fund background raises questions about his commitment to fighting tax avoidance. He's been through a slick personal marketing campaign to disguise the man with an ultra-privileged background. There's a lot of fuss about his private school upbringing. But again, to me, you kind of have to take a lot of that with a pinch of salt. Let's be real. Again, parliamentary, those people in Parliament, MPs, most of them have come from a privileged background. Most of them have come from, the Eatons of the world and the private schools and wealthy backgrounds. Most of them have. That's my point around the system, the establishment being what it is. Focusing on one individual, to me, is almost fruitless. It's futile. What about everyone else? It's the same thing. It's the same problem. But at the same time, why should the wealth of the parliamentary ministers come into it? It's really about this whole piece around not being able to relate with those who do not have such wealth, and that's a real concern. How do you represent the interests of people who haven't been through that, who don't have that level of resource or wealth? So I think there has to be a much more diverse set of backgrounds and experiences within Parliament. Again, this is something we need to look at as a country, about how we actually comprise the political system. But as it stands, let's be real. There are plenty of ultra-privileged, ultra-wealthy people in politics. That doesn't make it right, but we just got to face the facts. A lot of people have come from private schools. A lot of them have come from privileged backgrounds. That is part of the problem. But we ain't going to change it by just focusing on one man. That's the reality. If we want things to change, we have to look for change. A lot of people are going to be speaking about COVID. It's coming up to winter. The vaccine machine is kicking in again. Watch this space for more conversation on this. But Sunak finally did speak out about the response to COVID. And according to an internal source, he was actually one of the most consistent pushing for the watering down of COVID restrictions in the cabinet. He said that the government was given too much power and that scientists had too much influence during lockdowns. He said that the SAGE committee was not honest about the downsides of policies. He was critical of the public health posters that were plastered around the country, of scaring people, fear-mongering. So he's actually been quite critical around some of the COVID policies, which I know will be important to most of our listeners who have come from the Pandemic Podcast. And he said that, he was effectively blocked from raising concerns about the negative trade-offs of policies such as lockdown and the hospital backlogs and the effect of children upon children, and that too much effort was focused on the fear narrative. So that's a positive sign, but we can't forget that he played a pivotal role in his role as Chancellor of spending 376 billion on trying to tackle COVID, including some of the flawed contracts and crony contracts. It's all part of the same problem. But I tell you something, with all the fuss that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, the 376 billion spend on COVID makes the 5 billion spent on cutting the basic rate of income tax and the 2 billion spent on removing the 45% top rate of income tax, makes both of those things look small fry. I've talked about that on the previous episode on this subject. This is why you have to ask, what's it really all about? What's it really all about? The other element is that, Sunak, if you remember back in 2020, was one of many ministers who were invested in companies that stood to profit from the pandemic. Sunak's hedge fund had invested in Moderna. Sunak refused to say if he had profit. But there are so many politicians, half the SAGE committee, the 16 of the top 20 SAGE advisors were connected to pharma. We have this huge conflict of interest. We have this huge corruption within government. But again, this isn't just down to one man or one politician. This is a systemic issue. It's a systemic issue. Links to the World Economic Forum. Sunak's face is on the website, as was Liz Truss's. His family are alleged to have ties to one of the big companies that are partners of the World Economic Forum, Infosys. There's a lot of stuff flying around on that right now. And I'm a big someone who has big concerns about the role of the World Economic Forum over politics and global policy. But a lot of the smoke and mirrors around Sunak, there are clear links there, but I need to dig deeper, because, saying that, Infosys are linked to the kind of Chinese Communist Party and advocating for trackable digital identities and currency. We know those things are big on the WEF agenda, but I don't really see direct ties to Sunak and his family pushing that. So I think the jury has to remain out on that. But of course, people want to jump on that piece because that's the most shocking information that you could put out there. But I think we need to be more nuanced. It's not saying that he doesn't have any links, of course. But then again, let's take a step back. Every major company in the world is connected to the World Economic Forum. Every major political leader, every person of influence, it's all part of the same club. Again, we've got to look at this systemically. We can't just start singling people out. We've got to look at the bigger problem, the bigger picture, recognizing that these big centralized unelected organizations have huge influence over our world, over domestic policy as well as international policy. We've got to start looking at where the real problems is, and not the small issues where an individual does or does not have contact to a particular organization. We've got to look at the systemic issue. Again, I already talked about Starmer, the alternative, part of the Trilateral Commission, founded and launched by David Rockefeller, an exclusive club of 400 organizations. There's plenty more of these highly influential organizations that the politicians belong to. So what we really need to be asking is, how do we end the political theater? How do we do something better? How do we create a better political environment in order to operate in? How do we actually create a democratic environment for the public to participate in? And the reality is, despite the fact that we're seeing organizations like the World Economic Forum have more and more power over our governments, political party membership is at an all-time low. I've already said within this party, this political broadcast, this political commentary, that I have myself no political affiliation. I'm not a member of any political party, so I'm part of the problem. But at least I'm thinking politically, and I know many of you are. Those of you who regularly comment on our videos, you are thinking politically. What can we do? We're looking for solutions. And that's what we have to be doing right now. We have to be very clear what the real problems are. We've got to get away from the kind of dance of what's shocking, what's most hysterical, what's most sensational, which is what alternative media, as well, mainstream media and alternative media share in common. It's all about find the problem that makes people go, oh, gasp, horror. We've got to move away from that chaos and get straight into, okay, big picture thinking. What are the real core problems that we need to solve? And how do we start to actually create change? How do we actually start to imagine different solutions? But ultimately, the first step is we have to be willing to step off the sidelines and to start examining the real issues and be willing to stand up for change, in our own unique way. We're all busy people. What is the solution? If I had the solution, I'd be talking about it. But we at least have to be starting to look for the solution. We have to be exploring. And to many of the different components, there are solutions out there. Localization, there's many entrepreneurial as well as political solutions to many of the unique challenges that the economy is facing. The reality is they're out there. We just need to amplify, fortify, coordinate. We just got to start thinking differently. So who knows what the future will hold? But my personal view is we need to get order. We need to get a bit of political order and stability. And we've got to stop scrapping between the left, the right, the ups and the downs, the haves and the have-nots. And we've got to get together and start focusing on making things better. And I personally believe making the economy more prosperous, making a healthier nation, making it a happier nation is in our own hands. Yes, we can call upon the politicians and the government for support, but quite frankly, I believe that change begins with ourselves. And if we can't take responsibility for our own actions and our own world, well, why would we expect anyone else to stand up for us if we can't stand up for ourselves? So to me personally, it's about how do we actually find a way to make a difference to our own lives so we can live a life of freedom and flourishing, and so that we can individually and societally thrive in harmony with the world around us, so we can actually live in harmony with one another and the world that we live in. So what is the answer? I don't know. You tell me. If you've got the answers, post them in the comments. Should we have a general election? What are your thoughts on Sunak? What are your thoughts on any of the alternatives out there? Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments. I'm sure we'll do further broadcasts on this. Coming up later this week, my next interview is coming out on Thursday. I recorded it at the Better Way conference in Vienna. It's with Dr. Jessica Rose. She has been relentlessly and tirelessly picking apart the VAERS data to try and truly understand and disseminate some of the risks of the injection protocols that we've been subjected to at scale over the last couple of years. It's a fascinating interview because we go into the person behind the action. Of course, there's lots we can talk about in terms of the actual adverse reaction data, but it's a fascinating interview that we'll be putting out on Thursday. There are ways you can get early access to that before we publish it. If you visit the Elevate Network at weareelevate.org, you can find out how to get early access to all of our content. So you can watch that space here. And we've also got two exciting events coming up within the Elevate Network. We're putting on a COVID public inquiry panel next week with a series of doctors, commentators to come and look at the latest of the COVID public inquiry, because whilst all this political theatre is going on, there is other activity which are kind of falling in the dark, in the shadows of all the chaos. But the political chaos has already overshadowed the COVID public inquiry, which has begun quietly, of course. So we're going to be doing a full episode next Monday on the latest developments of the COVID inquiry. And we'll also that same week be hosting a panel event where you can participate in that panel discussion around what's happening in the COVID inquiry. We've also got a very exciting private screening of the Safe and Effective documentary, a director's cut, where we'll be having a short talk from the creators, Mark Sharman and the team at Oracle, about the film Safe and Effective, the documentary that many of you may have already seen. We'll also be screening the film and taking Q&A. So we've got some exciting events coming up inside the Elevate Network. If you're not already part of the Elevate Network, it's our private changemaker community where we're exploring many of the issues like I've just discussed here tonight. You can come and share your views, come and share the different content and discussions that's happening around the world, meet like-minded people, and a solution-focused, uplifting community. Come and join us at weareelevate.org if you'd like to find out more about the community and the events that we've got coming up. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Please hit the share button. We're still dealing with the legacy censorship of the pandemic era, which is still obviously, the COVID chapter isn't over. But we're still dealing with the censorship problems that we faced over the last couple of years. So please hit the share button, help us break the algorithms, and come and join our community to continue the conversation at weareelevate.org. Have a great evening. Let me know your thoughts on today's conversation, and I look forward to seeing you on our next episode.